So I guess I would like to start the session, which is my big thing, just in my own personal life, turning disadvantage into advantage. And as I said to you earlier, um, growing up, because I was so far out from everybody else, I always say I didn't have peer pressure because I didn't have peers. And that gave me so much freedom. It really gave me a lot of freedom. I mean, I'm not saying it wasn't difficult growing up Black and gay, but one of the things that really helped me, the state of the nation at that time, you're African American, you're gay. I knew my country hated my guts. One of the first things I did, I decided I was not going to hate my guts along with them. And one of the most important things I think a young person can do, and even adults, is turn your worst enemy into your strongest ally. And you know who that is? Yourself. No one, I mean, a lot of people, no one beats you up like you do sometimes. And the last thing, but just imagine if you could take that powerful enemy and turn it into your cheerleader. I think that is so fundamental to expanding spiritually, emotionally, and every other way, is you have to be on your own side. Now that sounds obvious, but it's not easy to do. I wasn't super critical of myself, but enough, but I defeated it early. I just said, I'm going to defeat it early. Another thing that I turned a disadvantage into advantage is, as I said, I was a special ed student. I didn't learn to read or write until I was around the age of 11. I mean, Baltimore is different now, but the school, well, I'm assuming it's different, but the schools were severely segregated. There was not one white kid in my class. The schools were overcrowded. And I didn't really have any of the 7 disabilities that would put you in special ed. It's just, I was a late bloomer. And part of it back then, it was part of the African-American community, which failed me, was, the talent in 10th. You focused on your energy on the 10% of the class that was really good, and then they were going to teach the others. That didn't work for me. So eventually I did learn to read and write, and I literally jumped from not reading and writing at all to reading like Hamlet, Shakespeare, I mean, the Iliad, I'm Taurus Bulba, I just went way ahead. So I actually turned a fear into an advantage, and then eventually I wrote my book. Now this will tie into the health aspect of it too, is I found out probably, I've been HIV positive for 40 years. 40 years this September. Technically, I only found out 30 years ago, but I know I seroconverted. And at the time, I went to a clinic, and it was run by other people who are HIV positive. I mean, this is like, it was a death sentence back there. And they outright told me, because they were being honest, they said, you will be sick in 3 years and you will be dead in 5. That was 30 years ago, 31 years ago. The thing about that, turning disadvantage into advantage, I knew you have a time limit. I had a time limit. So I got rid of anything that hindered me. I tried everything in the world. I even tried out for Jeopardy. I took 3 years off and traveled around the world. So there was something that was a disadvantage that I made into an advantage. It's hard to describe like an illness being a blessing. I'm not saying that, but how I transformed it has been a blessing to me. It really has. Taking care of your health. And it also helped me take care of some other health issues, like, I have a tendency to have heart trouble or diabetes in my family. So not only did it help me survive being positive HIV, it made me take control of other aspects, because there's other members in my family who are the same age. They didn't have these difficulties, but they didn't have the trauma of discovering that they were HIV positive. So because of that, I actually tended to other things in my health, hypertension, which I don't have. I don't have high blood pressure, although because of the pandemic, I just recently found out I'm pre-diabetic. So I will definitely address that issue. And also in the African-American community, I really have to address this. I mean, I know Baltimore still has a large African-American community, and it's one of the things, and it just doesn't affect us. I think something that is really not diagnosed, because it's not really a diagnosis, but fear is a disease. It is really, it's a disease. Like, I'll give you an example. I know many African-American people who would not get vaccinated out of fear because of Tuskegee. And even on a personal level, I've run into racism in medicine. But the point that I want to bring up is modern medicine has saved more people than it's harmed. You know, and one of the messages I want to get out there is like, yes, Tuskegee was bad and the racism was bad too, but the fear of hospitals and doctors is killing far more of us than that ever did. I'm not saying the fear was not well-founded, but now the fear is the killer. I cannot tell you how many people, even in my own family, they don't go to the doctor until there's almost nothing they can do. It's a big problem. And, you know, I mean, I could see, I mean, I'm going to be outright honest here. I mean, if I had gone in and went to get my vaccination and I saw a white line and a black line, I would have been concerned. I mean, that's ridiculous, but so is the fear now. It's, you know, it is killing us. It is really killing us. And also, your health is a community affair. I am alive because other people helped me. I was afraid when I first became positive. Well, the first 10 years, I didn't know I was positive, but I knew I was because I seroconverted. It wasn't that I avoided it. There was nothing to do. There was absolutely nothing you can do. So even when I did do that, it was part of an experiment. They said, you know, the gay community in general, we were positive. We're experimenting. I've done drugs, legal ones, that were just like, wow, they really hurt your system, but there was no choice. I mean, I was a willing guinea pig, you know, and it is what saved my life. It really is what saved my life. I mean, and it's funny because sometimes things can be humorous and sad at the same time. When I found out I was positive, I knew I was positive. There was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And when the guy told me, I was not shocked. I mean, I expected, but then I took a week off because knew I was positive and I wanted to see how I was going to feel about this whole situation. So, and I'm living in San Francisco at the time, and it's funny, but it's sad how life can be. So all of a sudden I'm walking on a hill in San Francisco and I have a beautiful view of the city and I'm starting to cry. I'm starting to cry because it finally hits me what's happening to me. But I also said, you know what? Life is just life. I didn't lie to a woman and marry someone and lie. I lived my life. So I'm going to pay the price. If that's the price I have to pay to be me, then so be it. So I'm crying and I'm like, and I hate being out in public and I'm crying, I'm on the streets. What makes matters worse, and this is what I find it funny, maybe other people won't. So I'm crying on the street, but it's 1991 and the 49ers had defeated the Denver Broncos. So everyone's on the street driving around, cheering and happy while I'm crying. Just like, and I'm like, just the juxtaposition of it just was really kind of funny. All of a sudden, a car full of guys come up to me and they go, yay, 49ers. And I'm crying. And one of the guys looks at me and he goes, leave him alone. He must be a Broncos fan. And it made me laugh and pull out of my situation. I mean, then it made me say, I got to deal with this. What can I do? What will I do? And then I went to clinics and started the process. So I turned a death sentence into a wonderful life. So another example, I'll give you this is, you know, I injured my hand. I don't really have the use of my left hand. I I fell down the stairs and went through a plate glass window and severed everything. So I really don't have any feelings. So, and I was a decent typist, excuse me. Now I can't use my left hand. I had to go through a year's physical therapy. But I will say this, eventually I went from depressed to blessed. It was definitely something that was a really good thing for me. So here's another example. So now I only have one hand. Now I decide to write a novel. It took me off and on anywhere from 3 to 6 years, depending. There were periods when I just didn't write at all, but something kept on telling me, especially with my book or anyone's stories, the more obstacles there are that would impede you, sometimes that's the biggest reason to do it. Not the least obstacles, but the most obstacles you have, sometimes that really, I find that really important. Also, for me, sidestepping a little bit from the medical part of it, I think it's really good to take inventory of who you are. My grandmother said something to me that made me look at my life differently. Especially, we were poor in Baltimore. We were dirt poor. It's gone, but Forest Street was, literally, I looked out my window and I saw the Maryland State Penitentiary, AKA the Baltimore jail, AKA demolished. But I remember as a kid looking at those walls, because to me they looked like a castle. And even at an early age, I really kind of like found myself in my grandmother, she had said, you don't poison what you have with thoughts of what you don't have. That doesn't mean you don't go ahead and try to do other things, but enjoy what you have. It's fundamental to enjoy what you have. And I tell people, especially African-Americans, children and young adults, when you leave the ghetto or your situation, or you make your present situation better, but if you leave, don't abandon who you are. When you leave the ghetto, pack important things, because when eventually I moved to Connecticut, and one of the things, I couldn't read or write. I'm the only Black kid in a school that's all white. And one of the first things I noticed was how ignorant I was. I don't mean ignorant in the sense of a pejorative, like, oh, I'm stupid. I hate to use that word. I was uneducated. But after being there 2 weeks, living in urban Baltimore, in a bad area, I found out the white people in Connecticut were just as ignorant as I was, just on different subjects. So that's when you have to realize, oh my God, I didn't realize growing up in Baltimore in the 1960s, very poor, was an advantage, but it was. And I think the problem is, how do you turn your disadvantage into advantages? And that's an individual thing. But like I said, the thing is to take stock of who you are, apply it, work with communities. As a matter of fact, I want to read something that I wrote at the beginning of my book that was the most important part of my book. Well, let me get my glasses. I can't hardly see. Sorry. It's interesting because I put this as the dedication, but it was the last thing I wrote. In a world of self-made men, I am not one. I was made by many. My every breath is a thank you to those who have helped me build the emotional infrastructure to thrive. Just as important, I would like to thank those who I often have mistakenly cursed, the ones who placed obstacles in my path and threw adversity in my face. They were the fire that transformed me into iron. So that to me was the most important part of my book, like even what you guys are doing with, these seminars, it's a group effort, or, to use an overused term, it takes a village to raise a child, but it's really true. And part of it is I really want the youth who are listening is don't buy into the cult of self-made, because I don't care how wealthy you are, the Bill Gates of the world or anything, we are social animals. You are not a self-made man. Bill Gates hired people who helped him work. He went to school that other people built. His goods go over roads that we've all built. So, I mean, that's just a personal crusade of mine. It's like the self-made man. Yes, of course, we take advantage of the things around us, and you're self-made in the sense that you use the resources around you. But other things were done. And another expression that my grandmother and used that I think is, if we're good stewards as adults for children, you cannot lead a horse. You could lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. And my grandmother said, yes, but what you want to make sure is the trough is always filled. So when they do take a drink, there is something in it. And she really applied that to me a lot. She really let me do that. So also another thing that I would want to point out to youth, and some of you are already doing this, but it's like, you're not going to be successful everything. Like people say you could do anything. My adage is you could try everything. You should try everything you possibly can to see what you're good at. I mean, really, like if someone told me when I was in special ed that I would be an award-winning writer, I would have thought they were crazy. I absolutely would have thought they were crazy. I mean, the journey to do that was long. But identity is important. And one of the things as a youth that we've done, and I did it too, is and it's a mistake, is to look to others for self-definition, letting other people decide you. And once again, I hate referring to my grandmother, but she is a really good source for me. And she helped me out with this and was very important. She said, Dwayne, don't explain yourself, be yourself. And I'll give you an example. When I moved to Connecticut and it was an all-white school, I did not try to fit in. I was who I was. And because I was a secure personality, people respond to that when you're yourself. You're always going to scare someone away. You're always going to, but if you truly are yourself, I find people are accepting of you for that. Now, I don't know, are we allowed to take questions in this, or should I continue on to other topics? Because I do have more, but I don't want to be a monologue. I'm sorry.
No, I think you can take questions. I have a question for you. I think what you talk about is so important, but I wonder if you could help us understand how you were able to develop that kind of confidence to be yourself, or to not worry about kind of what other people wanted you to be or said about you, right? Because I think we tell this to young people to like honor their uniqueness, but I'd love to hear if that was something you had to grapple with, or if it was something that you were able to just say, like, this is who I am. And
that was kind of, I was able to say what I am. That was early. I mean, but you pay a price to be anyone in this world. And I think that's one of the things you should tell our youth. You shouldn't be afraid of, when I went to Connecticut, people use the N-word like it was the word the and of. I mean, the N-word was background radiation for me. It was like background radiation. I can't let that. And my grandmother said, Dwayne, words are easily and cheaply produced. She said, you need to make sure No one could destroy you with words. If they're going to destroy you, they're going to have to put a lot more energy than words into it. And also, one of the things that really helped, because I remember my grandmother, and this is not to degrade people, but it really helped me. Because my grandmother was very much someone who did not care what people thought. One day I had the nerve, I don't know why I asked her this, but I said, Grandma, why don't you care what people think? She said, baby, when you get my age, you realize that people don't think much, so why bother with it? Now, I don't mean that in the sense that what people think about you, and you really, you gotta, don't join in. It's what I said earlier. Do not join in attacks on you. You have to be your biggest cheerleader, even if you don't really feel it, because if you don't defend yourself, if you don't stand up for yourself, and also find allies, really, I mean, I think one of the saving graces for me, I already had a strong personality, but finding an adult who will mentor you is really, really key. My grandmother steered me from some really bad things because I listened to her. I mean, she was like one of the most brutally frank people I've ever met. Now, my grandmother wasn't for like a person didn't have a strong personality. I remember the first time it was disco, and I was, oh my God, I was fighting my colors. I had oh my God, it was the 70s. So my favorite designers were Polly and Esther. I never wore cotton for anything, ever. So I come to my grandmother, and my afro is done right. Everything's cool. And I come up and I said, Grandma, how do I look? And she goes, baby, if your intentions was to look like a clown, you succeeded. And so, but then she said to me, she said, Dwayne, baby, she said, don't go fishing for compliments in the Dead Sea. I don't have anything for you. So it sounds like it's a cruel thing, but she was building me up. She really was. I mean, she just was that type of person who would tell you in a very brutally frank way what she would do. And one of the biggest things she's helped me, which was unusual for an African-American woman at that time, when it came to finding my religion, my grandmother said, no, I don't want you to choose Baptist because that's what I am. It's your soul. You need to find one for yourself. That is your job. Your soul is don't want to get into the spiritual part of it, but that was really enlightened for her. And before she sent me out into the world to this, and this is really important for young people, and even adults considering how things are now, it's like, don't be so in love with the message that you don't question the messenger. And I was really careful about, someone tells you something you want to hear and you just fall into it because you really want to hear it, but you need to question the messenger. And that really saved me from quite a bit of trouble. And also I have to share with my grandmother, because she was a really influence on me. So when I told her I was gay, she said, Dwayne, I don't understand. She said, but understanding is not a condition of me loving you. And that really helped me because she said, I don't understand. It wasn't like how could she understand, And I think sometimes we want understanding when really we just need to love. And that's what she said. And she said this to me. She said, Dwayne, I don't know why birds sing, and I don't have to enjoy their song. And I've applied that with myself. There's things out there we want to understand, we think, but it's almost backwards. It's like, I can't love you unless I understand you. It's like, no, I love people I don't understand. And even more so, my grandma said, and I didn't understand you way before I knew you were gay, Dwayne. And I said, Grandma, I don't understand you at all. And then we hugged. I hope that wasn't a long roundabout way.
No, that was really lovely. I love the quotes that your grandmother shared, like you're sharing from her. Phil also had a question in the chat. He says, Grandma seems like a wonderful person. Did you live with her or near your grandmother?
Yeah, except 5 years. Mm-hmm. lived either with my grandmother or 1 block away from her until I was an adult. So she was a very interesting situation. A matter of fact, this is really funny because I told my grandmother I'm bringing my boyfriend home, and I'm like, okay. She was cool with it because, I mean, she was the type of person, she says, well, if you like them, I love them. But it's my grandmother's house, so whenever I stayed over there, I always slept on a cot outside of their room just because I love my grandparents and I wanted to be as close to them. So I had told my boyfriend, this is my grandmother's house. I am not sleeping in the same bed with you in my grandmother's house. Absolutely not. It has nothing to do with the gay. It's just like, this is my grandmother's house. It's sacrosanct. And so all of a sudden, my grandparents come up to me in private and they go, Dwayne, I just want you to know that we made the bed for both of you upstairs. And I was just freaked out. That was way too much acceptance for me. It was just like, so I really had a good experience with that. Because she was very much, she taught you with every moment. And she even gave me a line that I still use to this day. If someone wants to borrow money from you that, is not reliable, because my cousin, came up and she said to my grandmother, I'd like to borrow some money. And this is a great way to deal with it. She said, baby, so what you're telling me is you've mismanaged your money. Now you want to mismanage my money. And she said she was really good about doing stuff like that. So getting back to the original question, find out who is credible in your life, someone who loves you. Even when my grandmother said, if your intentions was to look like a clown, you succeeded. Now that might sound like an insult, but I knew from day one, my grandmother had my back. And a lot of times, especially in the age of bullying, we're online and we're listening to people who are putting us down. Click delete, disengage, surround your people with people who build you up. I mean, especially on the internet, because I've even run into it, like dealing with my book, people who are offended by some of the stuff I said. And that's just like, delete. Walking away from negativity. I know it's hard sometimes because sometimes we love the people who are negative, but if you're still developing, you really need to defend yourself. Like, for instance, when I was growing up, as I said earlier, I knew that this country hated my guts and I had to have a way to defend against it. I mean, I'll give you an example, and this is in the book. This is in Baltimore. So I lived on Eager Street. There's a school, it's changed names, but it used to be Madison Square Elementary School. I think it's on, it's not on Biddle, it's on North Carolina Street. I think it's 1100 North Carolina Street. So I lived there, and it was the riots in Baltimore. I'm 9 years old. The irony of it, Martin Luther King was killed on my mother's birthday. And we're sitting in the room dark. She's blowing out the candles for her birthday. And Walter Cronkite comes on and said, Martin Luther King has been killed. And because I'm a young child, I have no concept. I go, oh my God, my mother just blew out his life. But as many of you know, or at least the history, and that's one of the things I really wanted to change in my book. One of the reasons I wrote it, because I was in Baltimore. I was 9 years old. I knew what some things were going on, but it was a time period where people who were in the news were never interviewed. Even events of it, I read that, Spiro Agnew closed the schools that day, which was true, but he didn't close the schools until we were in the school. So this is an example of me, even though I was a gay kid, I was the boldest one out of us all. You got to realize this is a time in Baltimore, all over the country, actually. The only time I saw white people, or even to a certain extent, we could go to their neighborhoods as if we wore uniforms. Whenever I saw white people, it was the post office, it was the postman, police officers. It was just that time. So I'm in class. The principal comes on the loudspeakers in the schools and says, we have to leave school. So I see some military people standing there who are talking to the principal, and then I walk to the park. And all of a sudden I see hundreds of white soldiers with bayonets, fixed bayonets. So all of a sudden, my first encounter with white people, large number of white people, they have fixed bayonets. And mind you, I'm 9 years old. I know some things, but I don't know others. So back then, white people were either on TV or they had accents in foreigners. So I actually thought Black people were Americans and like white people had their own countries, which in a way kind of was true. I mean, I didn't miss the mark really when I think about it. So I see all these soldiers, and me being the entrepreneur I am, because everybody had their lunch money. And I said, if you give me your money, I will confront the soldiers and yell at them. So I took their money and I spit on the ground and I said, you need to go back to your own country. Get out of Baltimore. This is our country. And I was yelling at it. And some of the soldiers laughed, but some of them actually looked away in shame because they joined the army so they didn't have to go to Vietnam. You know, they wanted to be in their nice suburbs. And here they are with a justifiably hostile Black population. And what was really funny about it is I was even so bold, there was a fountain in the middle of it, because Baltimore used to have such great parks. I know they tore some of them down. I hope some of them are still there. But he had his map on the water fountain, and I said, could I have some water? And then I made sure I got the map wet so he couldn't do the troops. Now, some super patriotic white Americans might think, well, those American soldiers, yeah, they were. And I know that now. But as a child, I see hundreds of white people with bayonets. I thought they were the enemy. And that's an aside, but it's just a viewpoint that is not widely out there. You know, what do some of the youth today in Baltimore see? I mean, how many kids from my time period, because Baltimore was one of the most traumatized city from the riots. And I saw it. I mean, I remember sometimes it was just the irony. I remember the smoke billowing up, you know, from the riots, and there's soldiers with bayonets marching down the street. And I'm sitting on my roof in Baltimore playing with plastic toy soldiers while real ones are marching down the street. So, I mean, there's so many impediments to growing up. And I think getting back to my earlier thing is fear is a disease. If you conquer fear, you really are on a really good course in your life. So some of my friends, they always say, oh, Dwayne, you're not afraid of anything. I says, oh my God, I'm afraid of everything. I just don't let it stop me. I just won't do it. I just will not let it. I'll give you an example. This isn't off the cusp, but I was in Hawaii, and ever since Jaws, I've been afraid of sharks. So I said, okay, I'm going to get in the water. Pools and stuff are fine, freshwater, but the ocean. So I said, I'm going to get over this fear. So I made sure I swam as far away from the boat as anyone else could because I'm really afraid. And then I got over my fear, and I'm treading water because I really can't float. And it was migration of the whales, and I had my head under the water, and I can hear the whales singing. You could actually hear them under the water. So my fear kept me from that. I cannot tell you how many things I've been afraid of that I did. I went skiing. Don't particularly like it, but I tried it. You know, the first time I went to a country, I was like 22 years old. I couldn't speak the language. I was really afraid. Fear is, I mean, not to oversimplify it, but fear is it really stops us. So my friends are really still surprised. They're still shocked when they say, no, you're not afraid of everything. Well, but I said, I'm afraid of a lot of things. I mean, I don't know about you. I mean, particularly, Ann, have you let fear stop you?
I think so. I mean, it's something that I don't know that I've thought a lot about, but I can definitely think of an example. I wanted to do triathlons for like 10 years probably, but I was too scared of the unknown, of all the transitions and the training schedules. And So I would say like that is one very concrete thing that I can say stopped me from doing something. But then once I did them, I was like, oh, that wasn't really that big of a deal.
Yeah, it
Like
wasn't.
the transition from swimming to biking to like, it's fine.
No, it's not. Well, also for me, now there's some fears that I don't overcome because the desire isn't that great. Like, I'm afraid of jumping out of a plane, but you know what? I really don't want to. Now, if I wanted to, I would do it. If I want, I mean, so it's kind of fear equals, is it worth it? Like I just like bungee jumping or anything like that. No, I'm afraid and I don't want to do it. You know, we forget that. It's like, yeah, I'm afraid of it. Now, if I really wanted to, I would do it, but no. I mean, I like the ocean. So I can't let, and I live near the Pacific now. So I can't let the fear of ocean or sharks keep me from going into the water. So it's kind of a relative thing in that sense. Also, with the African American community or any people of color, we have so many impediments to our health and many other things that we cannot afford to have unreasonable fear. I mean, that's one of the things racism has done. Is it makes us, it's made many of us afraid of some of the things that will help us. Like, I cannot tell you how many times, now it's a different, but when I was growing up, I cannot tell you how many times I heard from the older African community, Black people don't do this. We don't ski. Well, I don't ski well, but, and I don't like downhill. I like cross country. You know, I mean, I can't tell you how many things I've, you know, that said you couldn't do. So I just want to take this time to ask if there's any more questions and I can continue.
You have been wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I think thank you for the stories, for sharing with us about your experiences.
Oh, and I hope you get a chance to read a book. I don't know if you're a reader or not.
I am, yes.
It's
And
a tough read, but it will give you a really interesting perspective of what Baltimore was like in the 60s from a viewpoint of a child. I mean, if you don't like anything else, that part would be really, really good.
What was the name of the book?
Dancing to the Lyrics.
Great.
I can also send, I have some unedited copies if people don't mind a few comma and spelling errors that I could set. Like I said, I listed as fiction because I had to change the names to protect the guilty, as my members of my family said. It's like, you got to give me plausible deniability by not using my name.
Great.
So.
Well, thank you for sharing. I've put a link in the chat for our 2:00 session with Dr. Andres, who will be sharing about his story from prison cell to PhD. We're so grateful for folks who are willing to share about their life experience and the way that they have been able to find themselves, as our theme for the youth is be more you. So thank you for sharing how you've been able to do that, Dwayne. We really appreciate you.
And thank you. And good luck with the rest of it. And
thank you.
Hope the weather is nice there right now.
It is. It is. So winning all around. So, all right. Thanks.
All right.
We'll
thank
see
you.
Back in the main session.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.